Well, good morning, everyone. What I'd like to do today is give a quick presentation on conformity, and the person I'm going to concentrate on in this lecture is a researcher with the name of Solomon Asch. He did a series of experiments late 60s, early 70s on conformity, and it can explain a lot about why we see certain patterns in human behavior, as at least the way that we express ourselves to other people. So let me go ahead and begin. First of all, I'm not sure you can really see this that well, but it's a series of 3 lines. And 2 lines, 1 and 3 here, are the same length. Number 2 is shorter, to where you can see that it's shorter. It's not just a itty bit shorter, but it's noticeably shorter. And what Asch did was he wanted to see what would happen if there's lots of people who have a certain opinion, how that would affect the way that another person would express an answer as to whether these were the same length or not. And so what he did was he would set up groups of people. Maybe there was, I don't remember the exact number, but there could be like 3 or 4 people who were part of the study. And then the one person that was being studied didn't know they were part of the study. He thought that they were all just randomly brought in for some sort of university research project. And so they go around the room, and they might say, number 1 and 2, they would say, what's their length in relation to each other? And obviously number 1's longer, number 2 is shorter. But the first person who was part of the study would say they're the same, and the next person would say, yeah, they're the same, yeah, same. And then by the time they get to the person who has been brought in, who's actually the research subject, they would say, same. they would answer the same. And then they might vary the question, like which line is longer or whatever. But the thing is that when they would bring these subjects in and they would test them, they would find that at least when it comes to expressing themselves verbally aloud, they would usually conform to the group. Conformity decreased if one person of the group would say different, even though the others said the same. Then you had a much greater increase in the number of times that the person that was being researched would actually answer correctly and say that this line's shorter than this one. And I remember in a class I had in university where the professor called this the dissident effect, where there was actually some studies done where they would test people in classes how much they would adopt a certain belief that was being expressed by the professor. And if there was no discussion allowed, the number of people who would accept that belief would go way up, because I guess the professor's an authority figure. But if only one person in the class would then say, no, I disagree, they were actually part of the research, and would say, no, that's not correct. They didn't even have to really say why. But the idea would be that the other students would say, yeah, there is another point of view, and it starts processing in their minds, and the amount of conformity to the professor's standpoint went down. Now, I'm not sure who did those studies. That was not the Asch study, but they do parallel each other when it comes to findings. That when people express disagreement, the conformity to whatever is being expressed goes down. And I think this is one of the reasons why you notice on newspaper forums now. Maybe 4 years ago, it seemed like all the online publications, news, television, etc., would have discussion forums underneath where readers could interact and argue. And I also read that the reason they were getting rid of those was because even if you had this really well-written article, an opinion piece, doesn't matter whether it was right-wing, left-wing, whatever, and only one person said, I disagree with this, for maybe express a couple reasons, the amount of people who would actually accept this as true would plummet. So I think that's the reason why you don't see discussion forums that much anymore in regards to online publications. And the thing is that along with this dissident effect that takes place when people disagree with each other, you have to remember this affects the way that we feel about issues, the way we feel about what is right and wrong. Now, I will go back to Asch. They found that when people write on paper, if the person being researched, the answers were all given on paper, the conformity went way down, because obviously you feel like you're anonymous. You can say, write that. Your opinion of the line length, and you don't feel that social ostracification if you disagree. The thing is that when it comes to that then that goes along with what I said about newspapers. Often you see this in any online forums, that you are generally anonymous. And so you could be maybe a little bit more truthful about how you feel about things. There's not that fear that someone's going to look you up and say, oh, does your family know how you feel about this issue? Or something like that. And maybe that's one reason why you have some people in politics who would like to end anonymity on the internet, to where you would actually have to have an internet ID in order to express an opinion. I think that would really decrease the amount of honest participation, but when people can see who you are, there's more likelihood that you will conform to what the prevailing notions of what is proper will be. In crowds, I will throw this out, in crowds, people can see who you are, but when you're in a crowd, you have false ego projection, where you take your own ego and you project it onto the group. And there you have anonymity, because you're one face in 1,000. And that's where you could see people who, like, if there's a riot or the lights all go out or something, people are more likely to go ahead and do things they would never do in an actual setting in which people were looking at them individually. They become part of the masses and so forth. Another thing I'd like to point out is earlier, before this lecture, I was talking to someone and she was wondering what movies she should watch during the coronavirus situation. And I just suggested some movies, and I suggested one, sci-fi, Jupiter Ascending, and mostly because I could, when I watched this, I thought, what, at first, and then I started realizing, wait a minute, a lot of this seems to be very Jungian. At least that was my opinion. Jungian archetypes thrown in, and so forth. And the first thing she did was she looked up some movie page and what the rating was. And then she was like, oh, well, it has kind of a fair rating. It's not great. Or this is interesting because we do tend to conform to what other people feel. So if you feel like a movie's popular, everyone's going, oh, this is such a wonderful movie. And you go to see it because that's what everyone's talking about. And maybe you watch it and you're like, yeah, I don't really enjoy this movie. But then when you go out and people say, well, how did you like that movie that I told you about? You're likely to say, oh, yeah, that was great. You spent money on it. You spent time. And yes, there was some studies done on this back in the 70s about if you go to see a movie, you might write down after the movie, written down, well, it was okay. But if people start asking you verbally, oh, yeah, it was great. So even our movie choices, TV choices, are often predicated on what we feel everyone else is doing. What's popular. Doesn't mean it's necessarily correct. Doesn't mean that the crowd's necessarily right. And I'll venture to say that 5 years from now, whatever TV series you thought was fantastic, you tell someone, especially young people, that maybe you're 18 now, and then the people that are like 12 and 13, they turn 18, and one of them's your a family member or someone you know, and you say, oh yeah, this one movie that's really fantastic, and they're going, oh yeah, I watched that was kind of lame, because they're not part of the same social reinforcement that's taking place in the society. You're not seeing something advertised constantly. I will have to say, I have to bring this up, it's quite interesting that I tried to get my youngest kids, when they were young, to watch Star Wars, and they were like, oh, that was made a long time ago, I don't want to watch it. Then they re-released it, the new digitized versions. They re-released it in the 90s, and it was being advertised a lot, and it was on the front covers of a lot of products about the movie. And even though we had the series at home, my sons were like, I want to go see the movies at the theater. I want to go see them. And this, again, it illustrates that what's popular, what the culture's saying is the right thing or the fun thing or whatever. This is what people generally will adapt to. It's kind of the default setting. Yes, this is being talked about. I got to go do it. And then a couple years later, it's no longer being talked about, and people are kind of like, yeah, whatever. And so so basically the whole concepts of conformity, you can go back to these studies on simple lines to see how they affect the way that we express ourselves. And obviously, if we say something, if you play act something, someone says, I want you to act this certain way. You start adapting certain aspects of what you're saying to your general idea. So if you live in a country where, maybe you don't like politics that much, but you kind of feel like everyone's saying you need to go out and do a rally for this one president or prime minister or whatever, and you go out, and in your mind you're kind of going, yeah, it must be the right thing to do. So I'll go out and wave the banner too, since everyone else is doing it. And then afterwards, you may feel like, yeah, he or she, they're pretty good people, I guess. So you adapt to the whatever the prevailing cultural norm is. So just a few things to consider when it comes to the issue of conformity. Anyway, take care now. I'll see you later.